From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. Our guest for this program is someone I've been privileged to know for many years, health freedom attorney Bill Olson. Interestingly enough, Bill Olson at one point was named by President Ronald Reagan to be chairman of the Federal Legal Services Corporation. Bill, I thought you were a critic of the Federal Legal Services Program.
Well, but you did say it was appointed by President Reagan, so who also was a critic of the Federal Legal Services Program, as were you.
Indeed. What did you find wrong with it?
The fact that it subsidizes one viewpoint to the exclusion of others with funds compelled from taxpayers, violating Thomas Jefferson's maxim, and
to compel a man to
furnish funds
for the propagation of ideas he disbelieves and abhors,
which is sinful and tyrannical.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with you more, and I couldn't agree with him more. And we found that one of the things that they did that we fought at the time, it was just in its infancy, was the Community Reinvestment Act that, of course, has forced a lot of the banks to make loans.
Major reason for our current financial crisis.
If we ever traced back the problems that we have in the economy, we can almost always find government at the fault.
Peter Ferrara and I did a paper on legal services saying that had Nixon not broken his word to me and had vetoed funding for legal services, the American taxpayer would have been saved about $2 trillion. You know, the basic problem, and then we'll move on to health freedom, is that it places the power of purchase in the provider rather than the consumer. And when the provider controls the resources, it can decide which clients to represent, which causes to advance. And as you know, they were involved in group representation, so-called community education. They had paid lobbyists in state legislatures all over the place. And it's my view that Bill Clinton would never have become president but for the Legal Services Program. As you know, before you became chairman, Hillary Rodham was the chairman of Legal Services, and it was a nationwide network of several hundred left-wing legal activists in more than 300 local projects, and there were some 25,000 left-wing activists involved in the program. And it's interesting to note that 5 leaders of the Legal Services Program were in Bill Clinton's first cabinet. Vicki Cantor of CRLA, Michael Espy of Northern Mississippi Rural Legal Services, Federico Pena of Colorado Rural Legal Services, etc., ad nauseum. And if Nixon had killed it, Bill Clinton would never have become president. But let's talk about health freedom.
And that's the case where I was actually sued by Hillary because when President Reagan put our board on, they replaced the Carter board, which she was on, and they took umbrage at that and said the president didn't have the authority to do that using the recess appointment power of the Constitution. And they said the recess that he pointed us under was too short to be a real recess, and we actually litigated that case, and we won.
Yeah, Teddy Kennedy was a guy who argued against the recess appointment authority.
Well, it's funny how the Clinton people then changed their position when they came into power and used that power.
Well, as Bill Clinton used to say, where you stand depends on where you sit.
Well, those were good old days. I've been sued by the Secretary of State, and you have not been. So. Well,
I've been sued by almost everyone. When I left OEO, there was something like 50 cases pending against me. Oh. It was an ordeal. It took me a long time to get rid of them. What is this health freedom stuff? You've done everything in your life, Bill. You have been counsel to the U.S. Postal Service Board of Governors. You're a graduate of Brown University, University of Richmond Law School. You're knowledgeable on a whole bunch of religious liberty issues, free speech issues. You're a leader of the Free Speech Coalition. What's the deal with health freedom?
Well, it's, as most good causes, it's personal. 8 years ago, my wife developed rectal cancer, Jan, who you know, who had been executive director of the House Republican Conference, and she was confronted with, which did the surgery, and then was confronted with advice from the best oncologists and the best radiation oncologists and medical oncologists to take chemotherapy and radiation, and she assessed it and said, this is crazy. There's no good evidence that this is going to be useful, and pursued an alternative approach because she had the freedom to do that. And now, it's, matter of fact, I was just talking to her on the way over here. We're 8 years out. She's been perfect health since then. And it's because she forsook what conventional medicine has to offer. These are personal choices. They are personal, and they're religious, they're judgmental. And what the government is doing is trying to increasingly restrict our ability to make those choices.
As with me, you were a friend of the late Congressman Lawrence McDonald, who was a brilliant man and a physician. And he said to me, Howard, if you ever come down with cancer, under no circumstances are you to take chemotherapy. It's a killer.
You know, Howard, there are a couple of fascinating surveys, including one we just cited in a brief to the Federal Trade Commission, where they have surveyed people who worked with, who were oncologists or worked with cancer, and they said, suppose you had cancer, would you use it? And they said, no, it's too toxic and too little evidence of success.
And it destroys your energy and your immunity. It kills your immune system. So, and of course, I know you followed the so-called stimulus bill, which in many ways is patterned after the National Health Service in Britain. And under the Obama stimulus bill, they determine on the basis of your life expectancy whether you are entitled to receive treatment.
I know. We had, as soon as that came out and it was, the cover was blown because someone read the bill.
Betsy McCoy.
Nobody bothers to read the bills, of course. We actually wrote a bill for one of our clients called Downsize DC, which would require Congress to read the bills before they voted on them.
I remember that. That was excellent.
And we can't find one congressman to introduce it, not one. But maybe the tide is turning because they're beginning to see how these bills that are, you know, written in the middle of the night and they don't even get distributed and they take votes. It's sort of like March 33 with Roosevelt. And the same thing's happening now, and it had this HIT provision, Health Information Technology provision, that finally bubbles forward and realizes it's a terrible idea that could never have gone through on its own, but it gets through in the name of an emergency. Anytime there's an emergency, your liberties are in jeopardy.
You and I both knew Jim Buckley, one of the finest men I ever met, U.S. Senator from New York. And I recall vividly that on a particular day, they plopped down on the desk of every senator a piece of legislation that was several hundred pages long, and they said, let's vote. And he said, I'm sorry, I haven't read it, and I don't think any of my colleagues have read it. He said, let's put it off. They said, okay, we'll put it off till Monday. And of course, no one had even then read it. And it was a horrendous piece of legislation. And some of it comes through. Our friend Bill Richardson in California wrote a terrific book, So You Think We Read the Bills.
Right, right.
And they don't.
Yeah, my wife worked for Senator Buckley at that time, in that same time frame. Yeah. And as it's sort of funny, we're doing work with a group called the Senior Citizens League on this HIT provision. HIT is a good name, isn't it?
It is.
For what they're going to do to
sort
people.
Sort of like whip inflation now, but go ahead.
But the whole notion that you take seniors and you say to them, you have 5 years life expectancy left, you need a new hip. We're not going to allow you to have the surgery because when we divide out the cost by the number of years that we think you're going to live, it isn't worth it. And, you know, you don't mind
if people understood that this is in the bill that Barack Obama signed, they'd be outraged. But the media, of course, has not covered it.
No, there is fortunately a subculture of ways that information gets out, like this show, but it sure doesn't come out still yet in the mainstream press.
So what are some of the health freedom cases in which you're involved? One
of the most exciting ones, I'll just mention quickly, was decided today by the Supreme Court this morning. We actually succeeded at something. You filed a brief in it? We filed an amicus brief for the Senior Citizens League in this case. It was the Wyeth v. Levine case. This nice lady in Vermont was the victim of some a drug that was administered in an improper way.
She's the one who had her arm amputated?
Lost her arm. Wyeth knew about this, had over 20
Wyeth
times.
Was a big pharma, a drug company.
Big drug company that manufactured this particular drug, knew that if it was administered in this way, it would be have a risk of gangrene, and that's what happened to her.
And their rebuttal was, she should have read the fine print.
Well, actually, it's even worse than that in this case, because they wanted to have implied a preemption of the field by the federal government. They said once the FDA looks at the initial drug application and determines what Wyeth is supposed to put on the label at the beginning, then no matter how much additional information is collected, no matter how many times people are injured, Wyeth has no duty to let anyone know about it. And that was a doctrine of implied preemption, which fortunately today the Supreme Court narrowed a bit. So they didn't repeal Vermont's state tort liability law by the inaction of Congress, which is basically what they were arguing.
If you were king of the world, what would you do about the FDA?
Abolish it. It's a jurisdictional issue. The federal government has absolutely no business in this area. There's a fascinating book I've been reading lately by a pharmacist, professor of pharmacy, and the question becomes, how did the FDA, how did the government come to regulate medical truth? I mean, scripturally, truth is more a function of the church and certainly the family than it ever was the government.
When was the FDA created?
I don't know, but I'm guessing in the teens or
in the 20th century.
Oh yes.
And how did America survive without an FDA?
At the turn of the century, you could go and buy virtually anything you wanted to buy, and it was legal. And then all of a sudden, the progressive era came along, and they said, science will decide these things for us. They'll tell us what's good, and then we'll obey the scientists.
We have to take a break, Bill Olson. We'll come back and talk about more of these things right after these messages. Please stay with us. Our guest is attorney Bill Olson, one of America's leading health freedom advocates.
Hi, I'm United States Representative Thaddeus McCotter from Michigan's 11th Congressional District. As we enter a new millennium of hope and peril, with so many problems besetting our country and yet so many opportunities before us, it is oftentimes tempting to think that your voice doesn't matter. What can one person do to make a difference in the life of their community and their country? Well, the first thing you can do is to contact your legislator. You are one of the sovereign citizens of the United States. You elect your servants to work for you in Congress. Let them know what you think. Send them a letter, send them an email, call them on the phone. Your voice matters, because if you don't raise your voice in the interests of our free republic, who will?
I want to say and encourage people to watch Howard Phillips and the Conservative Roundtable. I have great respect for Howard Phillips, and I know he is a man that speaks the truth. He's worth watching.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. We're privileged to have as our guest health freedom attorney William Olson. Bill, what are some other health cases in which you've been involved? And also give me your predictions on how we can stop Barack Obama's drive towards socialized medicine.
I'll take the easy one first. It's quite interesting what's happening in recent years, and of course this isn't an Obama phenomenon. This was done under the Bush administration. The FDA will threaten people who are in alternative medicine, who are in competition with the favored establishment methods, which make so much money for so many people, including big pharma. You have this peculiar phenomenon that it doesn't matter whether Republicans or Democrats in there, they have been using the Food and Drug Administration to threaten people, and then if people do not capitulate, then they use the Federal Trade Commission to go after people who manufacture and sell alternative medicine products, herbal products and the like. And there was a major effort that was undertaken last September, this is before the election even, when they went after about 120 different herbal products manufacturers after, the story is that they did internet searches to find certain words associated with products. And of course in America you can't, there's some things you're not allowed to say. You're not allowed to say that if you have a particular kind of disease, that a particular herb would be helpful in dealing with it, even though there might be 5,000 years of recorded history demonstrating that it's helpful. In America, you're not allowed to say that because there's no study that no one's gone forward with this herb and said to the government, this is a new drug. Please do an analysis of it. We want to prove to you it's not going to hurt anyone and it's going to be helpful. And if you don't go through that process, which of course nobody would go through for an herb which is not patentable, if you don't go through that process and you make a claim about it being useful to treat a condition or a disease or diagnose something, they will go after you.
One of the big issues in recent years was medical marijuana. And I remember Lynn Nofziger felt very strongly that people should have access to marijuana to treat medical problems. He had a daughter who was suffering from some kind of disease, and he felt strongly that marijuana would ameliorate her condition. What is your thought on that?
The first issue is who decides that? And the answer that I absolutely am certain of is it's not the federal government. The federal government has no jurisdiction over these matters. Matters of police function are confined to the states and localities. This is the federal government comes in and says, well, we want to protect interstate commerce through the Federal Trade Commission. And they're not protecting interstate commerce. Interstate commerce would have to do with restrictions on trade or perhaps misbranding or some type of false claim. They go after you if you make accurate claims, as if you don't do it the way they want you to do it. The federal government has no business in this area. It's jurisdictional. There's no way for it to work. It simply cannot work. Let me give you an illustration. Of the 120 companies that they have gone after now that are these herbal companies, most of them have had to, or felt they had to capitulate. And the FDA...
Too expensive to fight.
Too expensive to fight, exactly. And they know that. And especially when they're smaller groups, they can't defend them. Fortunately, there is at least one group called Daniel Chapter 1. Their website's danielchapter1.com. Isn't that a great name?
It is.
It's a Christian ministry. It's set up as a church. It was established in the state of Washington. It has headquarters in Rhode Island. And they said, you know, the Daniel Chapter 1, of course, is based on the biblical story of Daniel being taken into captivity in the Babylonian captivity and being, along with 3 other young Hebrew
Shadrach,
boys.
Meshach, and Abednego.
No, different ones than that, but the same concept. But they go into captivity and they are told they're going to eat the king's wine and the king's food because that's the best. And they say no. They know God's dietary laws for the children of Israel, and they say give us water and vegetables and come back in a couple of weeks and see what you think. And they took up on the test, and they were fairer and fatter than the rest, which was the test. So, you know, health matters are as much biblical truth as much more than scientific truth, because scientific truth can be manipulated. We're now reading about how Wyeth hires other
Wyeth being the pharmaceutical
one of the pharmaceutical companies, and there are several stories about this lately in the New York Times. Where different pharmaceutical companies have hired ghostwriters to write stories that go in under the names of physicians in peer-reviewed journals. Now, this is crazy. You know, you talk about deception. Why doesn't someone go after that? But if you make an honest claim about an herbal product that's been around since the Egyptians, they go after you on that because it might cure too many people, I'm afraid.
What can we do to fight socialized medicine?
It is we have to attack it at a jurisdictional level. We have to say the federal government has no business in this, and somebody has to take that position. If it's a matter of the federal government has some role here, but just not that role, we will always lose. At some point, we have to say they have no role. Show me a provision of the Constitution, and not that you would try to, which justifies any role for the federal government with respect to health.
How do you feel about marijuana? Not a federal issue, but if you were a governor or a state legislator, what would your stand be about the legalization of marijuana?
I would leave it up to a patient and their physician to make that choice, and that would be a drug that they could choose if they wanted to use. That may not be the most popular view, but that happens to be my view.
I agree with you. I do not think it should be prohibited. I think many of the crime problems in Mexico and elsewhere are the result of drug prohibition. And I think if you simply eliminated those prohibitions, organized crime would be far less profitable.
Yeah, I haven't always had these views, but you do change your mind after a while, and you see how devastating the attack on drugs by the federal government has been to our liberties, and you have to say there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. I was present at a debate which I helped stage between Milton Friedman and Ed Meese, and Friedman favored an end to prohibitions, and Meese was vehement in insisting that all of these prohibitions should stand. But no, my views have changed over time, and I would legalize access to those. I agree with you, it's not within federal jurisdiction, but at the state and local level, I would eliminate those prohibitions.
Well, but, you know, even putting that issue aside, it seems like you ought to be able to have access to very basic herbs that have been around forever. And what, for example, this Daniel chapter 1 ministry is trying to do is trying to teach God's truth about health and giving people wisdom from Scripture and apply it, and then have people give testimonials about how well it has done in their life. And the government says testimonials are illegitimate. That's not a permissible scientific method to be able to understand whether something works or not. But the funny thing is, you know, we're talking about my wife Jan a minute ago, and I said she had a great result by ignoring all of the conventional medicine. The first thing you said was, what did she do? Well, you were asking for a test, we're doing in the break, and that's a testimonial. That's what we do all the time. We want to know what works. Did you try it? Have you seen anything better? Those are testimonials, and the government says that's illegitimate. You can't make decisions based on what other people say. You have to wait for the scientists to speak. And they, curiously enough, always seem to defend the interests of the people who make lots of money on prescription drugs and chemotherapy and that sort of thing.
We have to take another break, Bill Olson. When we come back, we'll have a couple of minutes for a final word from you. Stay with us for some closing comments from Councilor William Olson.
I'm Congressman Tom Tancredo. You know, I just returned from a hearing on the southern border in a place called Brownsville, Texas. One of the participants in the hearing told us that for them, a border really doesn't exist between the United States and Mexico. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have that attitude, that there are no such things as borders, that they really don't matter, that they're just lines on a map and nobody should pay attention to them, and that we're all just residents of the North American continent. Well, you know what? That's baloney. It's baloney, but only if you will do something about it to prove to the people of this country, and especially to your elected officials, that you know borders matter, that you know the sovereignty of this country is at risk, and that you will take action to make sure that they understand it. That action is best taken by calling your local talk radio stations, writing letters to the editor, and of course, letting members of Congress know that you know. That's the best thing. They're hoping, as a matter of fact, that no one really picks up on this issue of a North American trade association that essentially eliminates borders. But the fact is it's happening. You can see parts of it all of the time. So it's something that we need to stop. America, and I mean the United States of America, not the continent, but the United States of America is at stake. Do your part.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable, being broadcast from coast to coast. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, I hope you'll check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org. If you'd like to receive some of our literature, fax us your name and address. 703-281-4108 is our fax number, or you can use snail mail, which is, the address is 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Bill Olson, how do people get in touch with you?
Mostly through our website, which is www.lawandfreedom.com.
How did you get involved in this particular issue? Was it your wife's illness? Health freedom?
I think so, and I began to realize what a fundamental attack this was, that these are spiritual issues, that there are forces in the world that are anti-life, that are demonic, frankly. And at some level, we have to fight this as a spiritual battle. It's not just a political battle. You see people who support abortion, and there are people who want to restrict. The same people talk about leaves falling from the trees, elderly people. Well, they're not leaves falling from trees. They're people, and they're created in the image of God. And at some point, we have to look at these issues, as we've been saying, from a jurisdictional standpoint. From the written word, whether from the Bible or the Constitution, does the government have any role? And if not, then they should do nothing.
Bill, thanks for taking the time to be with us on Conservative Roundtable. And I hope you will continue to watch this program for more enlightening discussions, such as the one we've just enjoyed with our friend, Councilor Bill Olson. Thank you, Bill.